Listen!
Welcome everyone, this is Andre's Restart, and this time we're going to have a bit of a discussion on the size of the world of Tears of the Kingdom. And when I'm talking about this world, I'm not necessarily referring to the world we can explore, but more so what the lore may suggest about how big this world actually is. Now before going further, let me point out that we are aiming to hit 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year. So if you do enjoy my content, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. With your help, it just might be possible. So the world of Tears of the Kingdom might just be bigger than we realize. And before we get into just how big that may be, let's talk about how the game is already very sizable in terms of what we can actually explore. They really expanded on the world of Hyrule from Breath of the Wild. The Hyrule in Breath of the Wild that we get to explore is huge. It's one of the biggest Nintendo games ever. It's a massive open world game. But in Tears of the Kingdom, they significantly expand on this. They added hundreds of cave systems that we can explore, and that alone adds a lot more. But then also there are the skies. Now, the Sky Islands, there arguably aren't as many as we would have liked, but there's still a lot there, not to mention we can explore literally the sky itself, not just the islands floating in the sky, but we can fly around in this giant skybox. And then going beyond that, we also have the depths. The depths go very deep, far down. We can dive through these very long cavities in the world, and when we arrive in the actual depths, it's this giant, massive open area. It is comparable to the size of the surface of Hyrule. So when you factor the remixed surface with the caves, with the sky and the islands in it, and then also the massive depths, the world of Tears of the Kingdom is quite large. But something I enjoyed with my playthrough of Tears of the Kingdom is getting to see new characters or how characters developed. It helped the world to feel a lot more believable to me. And when I say that, I'm talking about this continuity between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, how there is this growth here, or how there are extra areas in some of the other towns like Gerudo Village. But there was a particular character that had me spiraling in all sorts of directions in terms of possibility once I got to know them a little bit. And that is Yona, a new Zora character that is the fiancé of Prince Sidon. And what's so interesting about Yona, she at first seems like she comes out of nowhere. Where's this new character from? And there are a number of new characters throughout the game, and it makes you wonder, where did they come from? Where were they before Tears of the Kingdom? But Yona actually gives us an idea of where she came from. She talks about how she came from another domain, another Zora's domain. The Zoras we see in Breath of the Wild are not the only Zoras. And this is very, very interesting. So, it wouldn't be the first time we've heard of there being more than one Zora race. There are more than one type of Zora. For example, in A Link to the Past, there is more than one type of Zora. But to see Yona reference another location outside of what we've explored throughout the world of both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, that really gets you thinking, where did she come from? And there are some possibilities. So, in Oracle of Ages, there is Labyrinth. That is another location where Zoras live, another Zora's domain. So it could be the case that this is where Yona comes from, and within the lore of Tears of the Kingdom, there's already an allusion to other areas that go well beyond the borders of this version of Hyrule. And just to be clear, it doesn't have to be Labyrinth from Oracle of Ages, it could be an entirely different location. But it really gets me thinking. Another example of characters that come from somewhere else are the bokoblins on these pirate ships. Are these new pirate ships that were built, or do they come sailing from elsewhere? And what's extra interesting about this, the implication of it, is that if we can find bokoblins outside of the traditional borders of Hyrule, then the extent of Ganon's reach goes beyond what we see throughout Tears of the Kingdom. He could have had impacts throughout the world. They could, in theory, take the story in a direction where, in some way, shape, or form, the long-term impacts of Ganon could have some sort of relevance in other lands beyond this Hyrule we get to explore. But another interesting consideration here is that there are different creatures in the world of Tears of the Kingdom than there were in Breath of the Wild. Now, we have some semblance of an understanding of how much time has passed since Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. About a handful of years, give or take a year or two. It's very subtle, but most people seem to think it's somewhere between 3 and 7 years. Point is, it's enough time that's passed that perhaps some creatures could migrate back to the world of Hyrule ever since the impacts of Calamity Ganon. Because throughout Breath of the Wild, for that 100-year period, Calamity Ganon was wreaking havoc. So it's possible a lot of lives were lost, perhaps some creatures went extinct, but maybe others simply vacated the world of Hyrule that we know. So when we see rare creatures like the Don-Dons hidden away in a small part of the Faron region, it really gets you thinking about what other creatures are out there. These Don-Dons weren't in Breath of the Wild. It makes sense to me to think that shortly after the events of Calamity Ganon, they started migrating back, and that's when Zelda and Link discovered this new species. That was the big change, Calamity Ganon being gone. But bringing up some discussion we had about Breath of the Wild before we even got a chance to play Tears of the Kingdom, when we look out on the different horizons of Breath of the Wild and also Tears of the Kingdom, we can see lands off in the horizon. Even to the north and the west, there are lands that are right there and very apparent. We're just not allowed to go there because there's this barrier that doesn't allow us to progress any further. At some point, it tells you cannot go further. This happens when you're on the coast as well. After a certain point, it doesn't allow you to go any further. But you can still see. There is still this imagery of lands beyond. And of course, most games have lands beyond off into the distance, and they're not meant to be explored. It is a video game. But in the case of The Legend of Zelda, I do think it's slightly different. And the reason why is because the map is canonically bigger than the map we've explored in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. So when we go back to Zelda 2, the map from that game is actually very large by comparison. And I say this because when we take a look at the map of Zelda 2, in a small quadrant on the bottom left, what we see there is actually the world of Zelda 1. It's just been scaled down and simplified to fit the context of Zelda 2. But when you take into consideration that the world of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, that map is fashioned after the original Hyrule from Zelda 1, just expanded upon, the implication is that this map we see from Zelda 2, there are lands just like that elsewhere. Something else to consider, that after the events of the Wind Waker, and also Phantom Hourglass, Link and Zelda from that time period go off to find a new land of Hyrule, and we see that in Spirit Tracks. So there's actually a decent amount of history in the Zelda series showing that the world is actually larger than what we see in Tears of the Kingdom. And this part is me going into extra speculation mode with not a lot of evidence, but I've always speculated about what goes on beyond the skies of Hyrule, because we do see that the Sheikah pay attention to the constellations, and we do know that the Zonai descend from above the heavens, and it makes you wonder where that might be from, because the Zonai, while they may seem godly to some, they're effectively just another race, maybe a powerful magic-wielding race, but that's what they are. They are not deities. So my speculation is suggesting that there could be a physical world that could be explored that goes beyond what we can even explore in the high skies of Tears of the Kingdom. So theoretically, Nintendo could add DLC where we can explore beyond the skies high above, where we could go beyond the borders of the ocean and find different islands or lands, or even go to the mountains we see off into the distance in the west or north of the Hyrule we explore in both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. There's actual lore material there, it wouldn't just be pulling out of left field. And going back to Yona, the fiancée of Sidon, when we have an actual character that we can interact with, referencing a land that we cannot explore, that's interesting. Is it just meant to be a reference to maybe Labrynna from Oracle of Ages, or maybe something in Zelda 2? Is it just a random detail that doesn't mean anything at all? Or is it a possible hint towards what could happen in the future, be it DLC, another game, not necessarily a direct sequel, but it might be nice that maybe with the next Zelda game, we go beyond just the Hyrule we've explored in both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. But what do you guys think of this world that is larger than what we can explore in Tears of the Kingdom? Let me know in the comments below. This is Andres Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.